Taliban. A plane carrying the body of the late Zimbabwean leader, Robert Mugabe, has arrived in the capital, Harare. His body is due to lie in state for 3 days. Scientists confirm they've created new embryos of the critically endangered northern white rhinoceros, even though there are no living males of the subspecies left. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. The United States is commemorating the 2001 terror attacks with ceremonies across the country. In New York, families of victims and survivors were amongst a crowd assembled at Ground Zero, where 2 hijacked planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in a series of attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda. The US responded by implementing massive new security measures and invading Afghanistan, which was protecting Al-Qaeda leaders. US President Donald Trump attended a memorial ceremony at the Pentagon, laid a wreath, and announced an escalation of the US military assault on the Taliban in Afghanistan.
We do not seek conflict, but if anyone dares to strike our land, we will respond with the full measure of American power and the iron will of the American spirit, and that spirit is unbreakable. We had peace talks scheduled a few days ago. I called them off when I learned that they had killed a great American soldier from Puerto Rico and 11 other innocent people. They thought they would use this attack to show strength, but actually what they showed is unrelenting weakness. The last 4 days, we have hit our enemy harder than they have ever been hit before, and that will continue.
Now, a US envoy spent almost a year negotiating with the Taliban over a possible US troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. Those talks raised hopes in the country that peace was coming. But now that the peace talks have collapsed, Afghans fear another surge in violence is on its way.
Kabul, September 5th. The aftermath of a suicide bombing that claimed 12 lives and killed a country's hopes for peace. Just days earlier, the US's lead envoy was in the Afghan capital to finalise a breakthrough agreement with the Taliban. Then, months of talks unravelled.
They're dead. They're dead. As far as I'm concerned, they're dead.
30 members of the Khan family were injured in a separate bombing just last week. They survived, but like many in Afghanistan, they're mourning the peace deal.
Trump said one of his soldiers was killed here and he stopped the peace process, saying he doesn't care about the Taliban. Our only hope was peace, which doesn't happen now.
Victims of the Taliban's ruthless bombing campaign line the corridors of Kabul hospitals these days. There have been 2 attacks this month already. Local politicians say the talks were their best chance of protecting lives.
The majority of the casualties are the civilians. Without peace, I don't think there would be any other way to stop fighting and prevent civilian casualties.
Wading through what remains of his home, Zaki Khan spares his anger not for the Taliban but for the US president, who holds all the power.
There are attacks happening every day. With the death of one soldier, Trump stopped the peace talks. Why doesn't he care about the killing of hundreds of civilians here?
For those in the firing line of the Taliban's 25-year reign of terror, Thursday's attack may yet be the costliest.
Now, the body of Zimbabwe's longtime ruler, Robert Mugabe, has been returned to the country. President Emerson Mnangagwa, Mr. Mugabe's closest ally before ousting him last year, met the plane at the airport in the capital, Harare. Mugabe family invited Zimbabweans to welcome home his remains, and a few hundred gathered to pay their respects. The former president died in a Singapore hospital on Friday, aged 95. His body will lie in state for 3 days before being buried at an as-yet unannounced location. DW correspondent Privilege Musanhiri was at the airport as the body arrived. I asked him how the country is planning to commemorate Mr. Mugabe over the next few days.
What is going to happen is that Thursday and Friday, the body will lie in state at a stadium called Rufaro Stadium. This stadium is historic in the sense that in 1980, when Zimbabwe won its independence, this is where the Union Jack, the British flag, was lowered down, and the late former President Robert Mugabe, as the first Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, was handed over and raised the Zimbabwe flag at this place, and that's where the celebrations were held. So for the next 2 days, Thursday and Friday, his body will be lying in state in this stadium for the public to have a moment to pay their homage and their last respect to him. Then on Saturday, it is then expected to be at the National Stadium, where all dignitaries, whether from the continent and elsewhere, are expected to come and pay their respect as well.
Now, this is a man who leaves a complex legacy, the hero of Zimbabwean independence, who then went on to become an autocrat. How do you think Zimbabweans will remember him?
Indeed, it is a complex one. There are mixed reactions. One is cut across generations. The older generation takes him as a liberation icon who liberated the country from the shackles of colonialism. Whereas if you look at the young people, they took him as a dictator who has stolen their future. But then ultimately, people are taking him as a person who will remain in the history of Zimbabwe as a liberator who played a role in the liberation struggle.
Privilege Musanhiri speaking from Zimbabwe. Now to some of the other stories making news around the world. Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong has urged Germany not to turn a blind eye to Hong Kong. And speaking in Berlin, he called on the government to suspend trade negotiations with China and Hong Kong. Mr. Wong met Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas on Monday. Beijing has summoned the German ambassador to the Foreign Ministry to protest at the meeting. North Korea's state-run television has broadcast pictures of its leader, Kim Jong-un, overseeing the testing of a multiple rocket launcher. The launch took place only hours after the North offered to resume nuclear diplomacy with the United States. Former Indonesian President B.J. Habibie has died at the age of 83. His presidency was the shortest in modern Indonesian history, but his legacy was significant. He introduced many democratic reforms and allowed an independence referendum in East Timor. Thousands of Catalan separatists have gathered in Barcelona on the region's main holiday. They're calling for a break from Spain and the release of their jailed leaders. The 11th of September marks the fall of Barcelona to Spain in 1714. Now, the British Prime Minister's decision to suspend the country's parliament has been declared unlawful. Scotland's highest court ruled today that Boris Johnson's move was an attempt to frustrate parliament ahead of Brexit. Mr. Johnson has put the House of Commons in recess until the middle of October, claiming it was to allow the government to start on a new domestic agenda next month. But his decision means lawmakers will not return to work until just 2 weeks before Britain is due to leave the European Union. The government says it will appeal the Scottish ruling in Britain's Supreme Court. Let's go to London and see if DW correspondent Birgit Maas can sort us through this mess. Welcome, Birgit. Where does this leave the Prime Minister?
Well, it does leave him indeed in a mess, Phil. Once again, he has really succeeded in uniting the opposition against him. And many MPs, not just the Scottish nationalists, but also other opposition MPs, are demanding that he recalls Parliament immediately. And also there are numerous opposition MPs who are saying if this is really proven to be a case, and the implication is that the Prime Minister would have misled the Queen in calling for the suspension of Parliament and not telling her the real reasons, then he should indeed resign. So once again, the Prime Minister is in a bit of a piffle.
So if the decision to suspend Parliament was unlawful, does that mean Parliament is now unsuspended?
Well, for now, Parliament is still not sitting. The doors to Parliament are still closed to MPs. The chamber is not sitting because it's most likely that we will know more really only at the end of next week, because the case is going to go, most likely, we haven't got it confirmed yet, but the government has said they are going to appeal, so it's going to be heard in the Supreme Court in London. And the office of the Speaker, who's responsible for all the parliamentary procedures, says it's up to the government to recall Parliament, and for the moment Downing Street is not willing to do that.
So Boris Johnson's mess with the law gets worse and worse because this now looks like he did something illegal. Does he go to jail for this?
Well, we will have to wait and see. But there are those people who said if he really has broken the law, and you have to remember it was already the case that MPs were calling for him and said that he has clearly broken the law, and if he's proven to do it, he's not above the law. So if he's proven to have broken the law, then he would have to face jail, yes.
Birgit Mass in London, thank you. This is DW News live from Berlin. Still to come. In football, Schalke's new coach, David Wagner, has had a solid start in the Bundesliga, and DW speaks with him about his ambition to create something special as one of the league's oldest clubs. First, though, it's being hailed as a milestone in rescuing endangered species. A team of scientists has successfully created embryos of the northern white rhinoceros. Only 2 females of the African subspecies remain alive. The sperm was harvested from male rhinos of the same subspecies, the last of which died last year.
These are Najin and Fatou, mother and daughter, the last 2 individuals of their species in the world, the northern white rhino. The last male, Sudan, died last year. Although the 2 rhino ladies are still very much alive, their species will become extinct when they die. Excessive poaching was their death warrant, that and losing their habitat. But an international group of scientists hopes to bring the northern white rhino back to life, with the help of frozen sperm collected from 4 rhino bulls before their death. After years of perfecting the technology, the scientists have been now able to harvest egg cells from the 2 last females, a risky procedure.
You have to understand why we were so tense. We operated on blood vessels that are this big. Our needle can make a hole of 2 millimeters. And when such a big blood vessel is split or pierced, the animal can bleed to death.
But it all ran smoothly. Right after the operation, Najin and Fatou went grazing and took a mud bath. And the scientists were successful. They flew the harvested egg cells to their lab, where they were fertilized with the activated sperm cells.
We're extremely happy to say today that we produced 2 blastocysts from the egg cells. These are early embryos that have a very high potential to develop into a baby. These blastocysts, these embryos, have now been put in liquid nitrogen. So we've achieved a new life, a new hope for this species.
The embryos now need to be implanted into a rhino uterus. But Najin and Fatou are both sick and can't carry a pregnancy to term anymore. So the researchers have another plan. The closely related southern white rhino is a more abundant species. The plan now is to implant the embryo in a southern white rhino surrogate mother. But they have to move quickly. Najin and Fatou might not be able to give birth, but the rhino baby would still need them.
They're northern white rhinos, and they must pass on their knowledge of how a northern white rhino behaves to their offspring. That's the time pressure we're under.
The researchers are still working on the implantation procedure for the southern white rhinos. But they hope to bring a small northern white rhino baby to life in the next 3 years.
Let's get more on this from Susie Ellis, who's Executive Director of the International Rhino Foundation in Strasbourg, Virginia, in the United States. Welcome to DW. So this sounds like an IVF for rhinos. How significant is this scientifically?
Well, it's a huge accomplishment scientifically, and as importantly, it's heuristic science. It furthers assisted reproductive technology. It's, as you mentioned, it's a long, long road ahead. Recovering the eggs is difficult. The next stage that they've gone through, injecting them with sperm and getting them to develop to embryos, is also a huge challenge, and they've met that challenge. Now, getting the embryos into a rhino, getting the embryo to implant, and then developing into a viable pregnancy with the calf on the ground is the next hurdle.
This doesn't look cheap. One wonders, why is this work so important? Why does it matter if we lose another species?
Well, first of all, this is not a species. This is a subspecies. The white rhino species is actually doing quite well. There are more than 18,000, sorry. Subspecies that has been functionally extinct for quite some time. The last sign of them was seen in the Congo in 2005. So there are no more in the wild. So the two females that are at Alpegida are really the only ones left anywhere.
Yeah. So my question still stands, though, doesn't it? Why does it matter? Why is it important to save this subspecies in this way?
Well, I'm not sure it can be saved, to be honest with you. Advanced reproductive technology is not really a viable way to save a species. For example, it's going to take easily more than 20 years to get a number of calves on the ground. And some species with which we hope to apply this technology may not have that long in terms of survival. So you were right earlier that it really needs to be moved forward as quickly as possible.
But from what you've said, by the time this technique is actually perfected and useful, it will be too late anyway. So I go back to my question, why does it matter?
Well, I think the main thing is that it matters heuristically in terms of the science. We've moved, these guys in Germany and Italy have moved the needle on our ability to use these advanced technologies to get more rhinos. Well, the first steps to get more rhinos on the ground. I don't think we'll see a healthy and viable population of northern white rhinos in my lifetime from this technology or from some of the stem cell work that's been used by Gally and the IZW team, as well as researchers at San Diego Zoo and Scripps Institute in San Diego. But it's important to save the white rhino as a species. It's very important to try to use this technology with the northern white rhinos. I don't think there's anything. Certainly this work should go forward, but it's a long way from creating a multiple cell embryo to herd rhinos on the ground.
Okay, and there's no plan B then? I was reading that perhaps there is something they can do with skin cells.
Well, yes, there is research going on with stem cells. The group at IZW and their colleagues are working on that, as is the San Diego Zoo and Scripps Institute. And actually, the San Diego team has just created some cardiac tissue that beats using these technologies. So they're all baby steps in terms of developing the science, and hopefully these will be available for other species that really need them in the future. For example, the Sumatran rhino numbers fewer than 80 individuals, and they continue to decline. It would be great if this technology could develop in time to get a couple of babies, Sumatran rhino babies, on the ground as well.
Good talking to you. Susie Ellis from the International Rhino Fund. Thank you. Now, known as the Mother Teresa of Cairo, Maggie has dedicated herself to working with children who grow up in poverty in the Egyptian capital. She set up nearly 90 community centres where she looks after the children and teaches them to love and respect themselves. Her work focuses on Coptic Christians, a minority that has long complained of discrimination in Egypt. Many of them live in the slums around Cairo and scrape a living from sorting through garbage.
They live and work in garbage, in the sweltering heat, surrounded by an overpowering stench. Boutros and Gorga sort plastic bottles every day from 5 in the morning until sunset. They had to quit school to support their families, meaning they will probably never find a way out.
If I had the chance to go somewhere else, of course I would do it. There's so much I used to wish for, but it will never happen for me.
It's the fate of hundreds of thousands of people here in Manshayat Nasser, the so-called garbage city on the outskirts of Cairo. These videos were made secretly. Filming is not welcome here. Most of the garbage collectors are Coptic Christians, a marginalised minority in Egypt. Each day, they sort through some 6,000 tons of trash, mostly by hand. Infectious disease outbreaks are common. Many children die. There are few hospitals or schools here. This woman wants to bring hope to where despair reigns, lift children out of poverty and change their outlook for the future. In the garbage slums, they call her Mama Maggie, or Mother Teresa of Cairo. She has a simple message.
They are loved. They are human like me and you. They are our chance, that together we are one.
The devout Christian has brought thousands of children from Garbage City to her aid organisation in Cairo, funded by donations from all over the world. Here, they're given health advice, lessons and warm meals for 2 days. The first step on the way out of the vicious cycle of poverty, disease and shame.
It's a mission of love, self-respect and self-esteem.
And it's a message that seems to be getting through to many children.
I learned a lot about love, happiness and solidarity here, and to listen to what my mother and father say.
For Mama Maggie, washing the children's feet is a symbol of respect. They often go barefoot in the garbage and injure themselves. Here they get sandals and learn how to look after themselves better.
When they asked Mother Teresa, what you're doing is like one drop in an ocean. She said the ocean will not be the sea without what I'm doing. We're just putting a piece of sugar in every human.
Boutros and Gorga have resigned themselves to their fate of working in Garbage City. But they hope that one day their own children might have a better life.
Now to football, and one of this season's new coaching arrivals is David Wagner at German team Schalke. He's been tasked with getting the historic club back into the Champions League after a miserable last season. A DW caught up with the former US international to find out how he's adapting to life in the Bundesliga.
David Wagner's Bundesliga start at Schalke has been nothing if not steady. 1 draw, 1 loss, 1 win from his first 3 games. 3 goals for, 3 goals against. Not great, not terrible, just steady.
We were okay so far, I think I can say. But we all together know that we have to work very hard and that we have to go a lot of further steps to create a season where we maybe after the season can say, yeah, we were successful.
After a catastrophic season last time around, mid-table mediocrity is refreshingly welcome at Schalke right now, but the coach is in no doubt that he has to have higher ambitions in the long term. Schalke are a big club, far bigger than Wagner's last, English side Huddersfield.
Yeah, obviously between Schalke and Huddersfield, it's a huge difference in terms of the size, in terms of the facilities, in terms of the stadium, in terms of how many supporters and memberships are in each club.
Those supporters expect big things. Last time out, the Royal Blues benefited from 2 own goals on their way to a 3-0 victory. Wagner says that kind of luck is a key element in the recipe for the success that the fans demand.
You need this little bit of luck as well, and then sometimes you can create something special, and this is what we had in Huddersfield, and this is something we like to create here as well.
Next up is Paderborn, freshly promoted from the 2nd tier. If Wagner is to create something special at Schalke, 3 points are a must.
Now here's a reminder of our top stories at this hour. US President Donald Trump has pledged to step up military operations against the Taliban in Afghanistan. The decision comes just days after he called off peace talks with the organisation and as the US marks the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And a plane carrying the body of the late Zimbabwean leader Robert Mugabe has arrived in Harare. He died last week in Singapore at the age of 95. Coming up in DW News Asia, we investigate a growing sex trade that forces Rohingya women in Bangladesh refugee camps to turn to prostitution to survive. And toxic smog hits Malaysia and Indonesia as both countries argue over who's responsible for forest fires in the region. Birish Banerjee will have those stories and more in just a moment. I'll be back at the top of the hour. Have a good day.
Fall in love with thousands of brands with Prime Wardrobe.